You don't want to give away surprise. But we have a system here where Congress is an equal branch of government, and he should come and make his case and talk about what the future plans are. What are the objectives? I've always knew there was a fork in the road. Is he going to go after nuclear weapons, or is he going to go after regime change? Two totally different targeting strategies. And we can tell today it's regime change.
Do you think, to that point, I don't know if you heard my conversation with Senator Andy Kim, but he is calling on Congress to come back on Monday. He says that it is time for Congress to vote on the War Powers resolution, to have a say, to demand that Congress have any oversight over any more military action in Iran. Do you agree with him? Does Congress need to come back? Is it that urgent and hold a vote on the War Powers resolution?
We're going to be back on Wednesday, and I guess I got mixed feelings about what Senator Kim is saying. He's been a friend. I've worked with him. I do think the president should come to Congress and say, well, here's the objectives, here's the plan. I think these are sustained operations. We should vote on a War Powers resolution. I would be inclined to vote for it, to support the president. But Congress should maintain its authorities. And also, the president has a stronger hand when Congress gives their support to operations. It gives him more legitimacy. So instead of the president fearing congressional involvement, he should embrace it, because when we support him, it gives him the authorities, it gives him the legitimacy of these operations. And as I mentioned, Kristen, I'd be inclined to support it because I've had good friends killed by this Iranian regime.
And Congressman, just very quickly, and just to be very clear, have you gotten any type of briefing, warning, heads up from the administration at this point? I know that they did brief the Gang of Eight, of which you are not a part, but was there any wider outreach to Congress?
No, but I do know they've briefed some of our chairmen. I think it was on Wednesday morning before we left. And so, like, our chairman of the Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, so it wasn't just the Gang of Eight that had been briefed. There's been a lot more, or more down to the chairman and ranking member level, but I have not. And I anticipate getting briefed this coming week.
And one more finally before I let you go. Iran has obviously already started to retaliate against U.S. bases in the region. Are you surprised by the speed with which Iran has retaliated in this instance, Congressman?
No, I think we've been tipping our hand with all the Navy units and the Air Force movements. Iran has had time to come up with their plans. They have 1,000 ballistic missiles that can strike, and so they're a very dangerous adversary for our air bases, our Navy bases, and our allies. But you can't be blackmailed. You can't be extorted by Iran. So this is, so I'm not surprised.
All right. Congressman Don Bacon, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your perspective on this breaking and developing story. We really appreciate it. I want to get right to NBC's White House correspondent, Monica Alba, who is monitoring the developments for us from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Monica, in talking to your sources there and on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue, what's the reaction been so far?
Well, Kristen, we are learning a bit more and some additional details about how some of the preparation took place here for this massive, in the words of President Trump, an ongoing campaign now, these strikes in conduction and in collaboration and conducted with Israel. We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio did brief the Gang of Eight for more than an hour on Tuesday ahead of the State of the Union address and that speech. And remember that in that speech, which could have been an opportunity, Kristen, as you were just discussing with the congressman, for the president to potentially make his case to the American people for why he might take military action. He did talk about Iran. He did say that essentially he didn't want Iran to be able to continue with its nuclear capabilities, but he didn't go into much detail. Again, we don't know if he might decide now to do that or when he might do that. And in the days since then, we know that when he was asked about this possibility, he said that he wasn't happy with Iran, that he was continually briefed by some of his top national security advisors. It was just a couple of days ago, Kristen, that you had Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, his special envoy for the Middle East, in Geneva, participating in talks to see if diplomacy could be reached, and in an effort to continue to see if they could advance that diplomatic path. You had the foreign minister of Oman, who was meeting with Vice President Vance just 24 hours ago. That's the photo you're seeing there on your screen here in Washington, where they had a conversation that according to the foreign minister, he felt it was productive. He said coming out of that he believed that peace could be reached, that a deal could potentially be in the next couple of days. Obviously now this morning, he has issued a statement saying that he is dismayed with this action that the United States has taken. We haven't gotten any kind of reaction or response from Vice President Vance for his part, beyond telling a reporter with the Washington Post in the last couple of days that he believed even if the president decided to go forward with military action, he said there was, quote, no chance that this could become a drawn-out, wider regional war or conflict that would initially really involve the U.S. for years to come, laying down that marker. But when the president was talking about this yesterday, he said something a little bit different, saying that certainly if he decided he was going to act and pursue this military action, that there's always the risk of a wider entanglement and that there's always the chance that that could happen here. And now that we are in that conversation, Kristen, I think it's really notable just to remind viewers that the president is somebody who, when he was a candidate, campaigned on ending, quote, forever wars and ending additional foreign entanglements. And this is now the 6th military action that the president has taken since taking office in his second term. And again, we don't have any plans to hear from the president in the immediate coming hours. It's always possible that that could change as he does remain down in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where he does have the ability to monitor all of this in real time and where I'm told he is continually being briefed by his top aides. Kristen.
Monica, before I let you go, fantastic reporting there from the White House. What are your sources telling you about the diplomatic process? Is it possible that it can get back on track in any way, shape, or form, or is it effectively dead for now, given this strike?
Yeah, remember last summer when the president did strike those nuclear sites in Iran, it was in the midst of ongoing negotiations and talks about that exact issue. And eventually those did get back on track, and we have seen them play out over the last few weeks and months. So it's possible, but it doesn't seem like there's any immediate chance for that, given that I am also told by a White House official what you have been reporting, what you've been talking about all morning, which is this idea that this is not an isolated hours-long strike or campaign, that this is more of a days-long effort and potentially could be even longer than that. Remember, it was just about a week ago where there was reporting that the president was also considering in a menu of options just a limited or a more targeted or tailored strike to get Iran potentially to pressure the regime into some kind of a deal. Obviously, that is not the decision that the president ended up taking. Again, with this seeming to be a larger undertaking and the president himself saying that. I think one other thing, Kristen, that the president mentioned in his video overnight is this acknowledgement, this idea that he says American heroes could be lost in this conflict, that there could be the death of U.S. service members, which is an absolutely important and significant comment from the president. And he did, we should point out, call this a war, saying that is what happens in war. And so certainly this is now a White House that is facing, I think, increasing pressure to lay out more to the American public about why the president made this decision and what happens next.
It's so important that you point that out, Monica. I think that comment by President Trump stood out to so many people. Just striking to hear him acknowledge that, yes, there may be U.S. casualties here. Monica Alba with your great reporting from the White House. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a short time ago, my colleagues Peter Alexander and Laura Jarrett spoke with Iran's foreign minister about the strike. Here's a little bit of what he had to say. Take a look.
We are facing an act of aggression, and obviously we have every right to defend ourselves. So what we are doing is act of self-defense, which is absolutely legal and legitimate. So, and we think that we are fully prepared for that, even more prepared than previous time, the 12-day war. And I believe we manage this. We know very well how to defend ourselves. We learned lots of lessons from the previous war, and we will certainly teach aggressors a lesson they deserve.
With that, I want to bring in NBC's Yasmin Vesuvian. Yasmin, what do you make of what we heard from Iran's foreign minister, defiant there with Laura and Peter, not surprisingly?
Not surprisingly, I think it's important to understand the Iranian perspective here. And for them, the aggression that they're seeing from the United States and Israel with the ultimate objective of regime change is not justification for a war. In fact, they see it as a violation of international law. The Iranians felt as if, and as we heard from the foreign minister there, they were engaged in incredibly sincere and consistent negotiations when it came to the nuclear negotiations that were going on with Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner, and hence were subsequently caught off guard by this attack because of those ongoing negotiations, which we remember there was a statement that came out of those negotiations late Thursday saying they were going quite well, but of course then there was a turn of course and there was reporting indicating the president was not happy with what was coming out of those negotiations so far, hence why it seems as if the foreign minister is now obviously and understandably defending their right to defend themselves as a country against both Israel and the United States in a state of war, because it seems very much they are now at war with one another. I think the question is how they do that. We've already seen kind of a swift response so far, but Kristen, I think what gave the United States and Israel so much confidence in this most recent attack is what we saw take place over the last summer. And I bring that up only to say that over the last summer, Iran's talk was a heck of a lot bigger than their actual bite. And it seemed as if they didn't have the capabilities militarily to pull off what they said they could pull off. And I think the Israelis, it seems, and the Americans are taking the bet that the same is happening now. And that's also combined with, again, I keep reiterating this, Kristen, but I think it's really important to do, kind of the dire circumstances in which the country is currently in, being closed out from the rest of the world with these crushing sanctions and the economic instability that is inside that country. All of that together does not give them the resources that they would need to defend themselves adequately against the forces that are the Israeli army, the Israeli forces, and the U.S. forces as well, Kristen.
Well, and of course, the big question looming over all of this, Yasmin, is what is the Trump administration's ultimate goal? Is it, in fact, regime change? President Trump talked about that today. He said ultimately it's up to the Iranian people, which was an extraordinary statement. The foreign minister was asked about that as well. I'm going to play a little bit of that for you and get your reaction on the other side.
You cannot do regime change while millions of people are supporting this so-called regime. We just look at what happened in the 47th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. We had altogether about 30 million people in the streets in all cities of Iran in support of the Islamic Republic and in support of the whole system. So you cannot, change this regime because it's supported by the people. Yes, there are also people who are complaining, but they are strong supporters of the regime, of the system at the same time.
So Yasmin, when you hear that, underscores just how complicated regime change would be.
It's incredibly complicated. It would be a long, protracted war if, in fact, that is what both the United States want and the Iranians want as well. But I think it's also important to talk about the fact that you heard from the foreign minister that many of the people that were killed during those protests were, in fact, intelligence agents from other countries. That's not who they were, Kristen. They were Iranian citizens. It was a 7-year-old art student. It was a young couple with an 8 and 10-year-old that they left behind after being killed in these protests. It was a 28-year-old biotech student. It was an artist. It was a fruit seller. It was a geophysicist. These were Iranian citizens that felt as if their lives were up against a wall and they had no other choice but to flood into the streets of Iran, very well knowing their lives were at risk because they wanted regime change, Kristen.
All right, Yasmin Vesuvian, thank you so much for that in-depth reporting. We really appreciate it. As some stations leave us, we do want to pause for a second to allow others to join our ongoing coverage of this breaking news of the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. Good morning once again. It's 10:30 in the morning on the East Coast. We are following that ongoing breaking news overseas with the U.S. and Israel striking targets within Iran earlier this morning. Iran has begun to retaliate, targeting U.S. military bases in the region. Explosions have also been heard in northern Israel and Dubai. I now want to bring in NBC's international correspondent Matt Bradley, who is in Tel Aviv, where there have been sirens going off throughout the morning. Matt, give us the very latest in terms of what you're seeing and hearing there.
Well, I can tell you what I'm hearing just now. You actually might have heard it yourself, is this blaring sound on my cell phone, which comes up. I don't know if you can see all of these critical alerts. This is how this goes here, Kristen. We hear an alert on your phone, you get a little bit of time, and then presumably, in almost all cases, but not in all cases, there's then a loud citywide alert broadcasting that you need to go to a shelter immediately. And that's where I find you right now, inside this shelter, inside our office building. The walls look boring and average, but they're actually quite thick. And if you can see behind me, Kristen, this, in theory, is going to be able to basically clean the air, filter the air, so that we can stay in here forever, even if there's a chemical weapons attack or poison gas. Presumably, we'll be able to survive here in the shelter. And it is in shelters just like this one, which in Hebrew are called a mamad, that you will find the vast majority of the population of Israel. Jewish, Muslim, Christian, all of them are going to be headed right here. We've been heading here throughout the morning and all afternoon. And even from inside this fortified room, we can still hear the outgoing air defense systems intercepting some of these Iranian missiles, and we can hear those interceptions. And in fact, just a couple of minutes ago, we heard what sounded like the largest set of interceptions that we've had so far. Now, despite all of that, and even, despite what we were seeing last summer, last June, when we saw Iran attack over and over and over again, Israel for 12 days, there were 30 dead. So far today, we haven't heard of a single dead person here in Israel from those Iranian bombardments. We have heard that there is a boy who was injured here in Tel Aviv because of an Iranian projectile. It hurt his lower legs. There is apparently, or reportedly, another injury in the northern part of Israel in Haifa. But so far, considering the amount of firepower that the Iranians have thrown at this tiny state, there is very little to show in the way of casualties. The Iranians are reporting that dozens of people have been killed at a school that was hit by Israeli attacks or American attacks in just the past couple of hours. But so far, this three-ply system of air defense, the Iron Dome, which defends against sort of lower-level projectiles, David's sling, which is probably the one that's being used more frequently here, is supposed to be defending against longer-range, higher-altitude missiles, intercepting them further away. So we could really see this entire conflict go by and not see much in the way of Israeli casualties. But it's too soon to say that, because we don't know exactly what Iran's capabilities are. The president and Israeli officials have said that over that 12-day war, 8 months ago, they managed to deeply set back Iran's, not only its nuclear program, but its conventional weapons program, including its ballistic missiles, which was one of the things that Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to push into those Iranian nuclear negotiations. He was telling the Trump administration, that they needed to limit Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. That was one of the reasons why Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders were pushing so hard on the Trump administration to try to get their voices heard in those negotiations that had been ongoing until just a couple of days ago, until really just this morning when Israel and the United States launched that preemptive attack. But what we're seeing right now is a real moment of uncertainty. This could either really change the Middle East, or the United States and Israel could scale back their ambitions dramatically. Now, so far we've heard both the President of the United States and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, both of them calling on Iranian people to overthrow their own regime, to take the baton from the Americans and the Israelis and essentially finish the job against the clerics, against the Ayatollahs who now run Iran. Neither of them has said that they, the Americans or the Israelis, are planning on sending troops with quote-unquote boots on the ground into Iran to effect regime change in person. That's not something that has been publicly stated. However, they are both clearly encouraging the Iranian people to do that job for them, and clearly one of the ambitions of this incredibly complicated, unprecedented military campaign between the United States and Israel against Iran is to affect regime change in Iran. It's unclear what that's going to lead to. The fact is that there is no organized, vocal opposition group in Iran that enjoys connections with other international countries and the international community. Most of the real dissidents who have a real international standing are outside of the country, and it's unclear whether or not somebody from the regime would be able to step in. All morning, we've been hearing from the Israeli media buzzing with speculation, and it is just speculation, that the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in these strikes, or at least badly injured, and that Masoud Pezeshkian, the president, was also killed. Now, as you saw, we heard from the Abbas Araghchi. He is the foreign minister of Iran, and he told NBC News in that exclusive interview just a few hours ago that both men are safe, and that, quote, as far as I know, this is Araghchi talking, they are both unharmed or not dead. Now, that would fly in the face of the reports that we've been hearing now, but again, this is all speculation. NBC News cannot confirm this information.
Well, just one of the biggest outstanding questions, where exactly is the leader of Iran? Is he still alive? And to your point, Matt Bradley, just how complicated regime change would be. Administration officials themselves acknowledging it's not a clear picture of who would replace the current leadership. Matt Bradley, please stay safe. Extraordinary to have your reporting from a shelter. We've really appreciated in Tel Aviv. I now want to bring in NBC's Ralph Sanchez, who is standing by. And as we leave Matt Bradley, we hear those sirens start to go off again. Matt, let me go back to you. Tell me what you're hearing, Matt.
Well, this is something that we've been hearing all day long. Just about every hour we've been hearing a set of sirens going off. The last time that we didn't hear much, the time before that, we heard a massive bombardment, huge sounds of interceptions or outgoing anti-air missiles. So again, I hate to say that this is becoming routine. So far this morning, so far this afternoon, we've been hearing it constantly. As long as Israel's attacks against Iran continue, and as long as Iran continues to have the capability to strike back, we'll probably be hearing this sound for quite a while.
All right, Matt Bradley, please stay safe. We really appreciate your reporting. I do now want to go to NBC's Ralph Sanchez. Ralph, I know you have some new reporting about targeting Iranian officials. Ralph, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Kristen, that's right. So we knew that Israeli warplanes targeted Iranian leadership during that initial wave of strikes. The Israelis targeting both Iranian leaders, also going after Iran's air defenses. We are now starting to get a little bit more detail about what exactly the Israelis were going after. In just the last few minutes, an Israeli military official saying that Israel targeted 3 gatherings of Iranian leaders. Now, we don't know exactly what those gatherings were, but we, of course, have had Iranian officials on high alert for this wave of strikes. It is very possible that you have been having councils of war happening in Iranian government buildings, in Iranian government bunkers. This official not saying whether Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, was within those 3 gatherings, but is saying that they were going after both political and military leaders who were essential to Iran's decision-making and essential to its ability to wage war. Now, we know that the Israeli military is now in a battle damage assessment phase. They are looking at what they have struck, and they are trying to figure out exactly what kind of damage they caused. Iran, obviously, is not a transparent place. It is difficult to know exactly who's alive and who's dead. But Israeli intelligence, as we've seen over and over again, has extensively penetrated the Iranian government, and so you can bet that they will be working all manner of sources right now, signals intelligence, human sources, trying to understand to what extent they have succeeded in decapitating the Iranian leadership. Chris, and I'll also just tell you, in the last couple of minutes, we have heard from the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that he has conducted a phone call with President Trump. You see him on your screen there. Of course, both leaders address their countries separately. They now, as far as we're aware, have spoken for the first time since the bombing began. Kristen, you may not be able to see it because the lettering on the bottom of our screen is covering it, but there is a book in front of Netanyahu on his desk there. It is not an accident that it's in that photo released by the Prime Minister's office. The book is called Allies at War, and it is about the effort of the US, the UK, the Soviet Union to defeat Nazi Germany. And it is certainly not a coincidence that the Israeli Prime Minister has this book, Allies at War, in that photograph as the US and Israel begin this unprecedented campaign jointly against Iran. Kristen.
What a notable detail, Raf Sanchez, to bring us in that perspective from inside Israel. The concerns, Raf, about this becoming a wider war, what are your sources telling you about that, particularly given that we are seeing how quickly Iran retaliated?
Yeah, so Kristen, we are hearing from American allies in Europe, in NATO right now. They are stressing, first of all, that they were not involved in this attack. We don't know at this point whether the White House even gave them any serious heads up before launching this joint U.S.-Israeli campaign. They are deeply, deeply concerned about the rippling effects, about the potential for a regional war. You're seeing on your screen there just chaos in different cities across the broader Middle East. And while the battlefield is the skies and the seas and the territory of Middle Eastern countries, the effects here really have the potential to be global. We've been talking all day about the potential for the Strait of Hormuz, that critical waterway through which 1/5 of the world's oil flows, to be blocked. There is real bracing right now for volatility in the oil markets, depending on how this plays out. Real concern about the impact this could have on global shipping. You'll remember the Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen basically managed to strangle a significant section of global shipping by attacking merchant vessels in the Red Sea. There has been a ceasefire on that front for several months now, but there are deep, deep concerns that the Houthis, in support of Iran, will begin those attacks. And of course, Kristen, as we've been saying, air travel is in total chaos worldwide right now. Dubai's airport is one of the busiest airports in the world. It's a major, major hub, a major transit point. It is closed. It's closed indefinitely. And so countries all over the world have citizens who are stranded right now, unable to get home. So real global shockwaves being felt by this. Kristen.
All right, Raf Sanchez, thank you so much for your reporting. We really appreciate it. I now want to bring in former Defense Secretary in the first Trump administration, Mark Esper. Secretary Esper, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Good morning, Kristen. Good to be with you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here and your perspective. Let me start off by just getting your reaction. Obviously, we've seen President Trump amass this huge military presence in the region. And here we are today, strikes underway that could last, based on my conversations, for days, if not weeks. What do you make of this?
Well, I was not surprised that it happened after yesterday when we heard that the U.S. ambassador to Israel gave his employees there authorization to leave immediately the state of Israel. That was a tip off there. We also know that Kushner and Witkoff came out of the negotiations on Thursday with the Iranians, very close-lipped about it, which told me that there was not progress being made. And I think the president and his team made the right call, and that is that the Iranians weren't serious, at least not serious enough to give up their enrichment program. So in my mind, those few things, coupled with the fact that we had reached the apex of our deployment of air and naval forces in the Middle East, you can't keep them there forever, right? At some point in time, their readiness wears down. So it's one of these things, you got to either use them or pull them back. And I think the president made the decision, given a number of other factors, some of which he laid out this morning in his remarks, that it was time to act.
Well, given your role as Secretary of Defense, you understand what it is like to think about, draw up potential battle plans, war plans. What is the best case scenario, Mr. Secretary, in this moment, and what is the worst case scenario as you see it?
Well, that's a good question. Of course, it begins with what's the purpose of the operations, and I think, as the president laid out, he said we wanted to destroy their ballistic missile capabilities, production capabilities. So I assume that some of the sites that were taken out in Iran, internally to Iran, will contain some of those sites, and they look familiar to me based on my recollections. But he also talked about going after their naval assets, and I assume that was to make sure that they couldn't harass commercial shipping or to mine the Strait of Hormuz. Interestingly, we haven't seen much of that. At least the reporting hasn't indicated any strikes along the coastal areas or against the Navy. We know that Israel went after leadership targets. That, of course, suggests that they want to go after decapitation. And then the president mentioned regime change. And I think here at what he's hoping for is that there be enough pressure on the Iranian regime that the people in Iran would rise up once again, just like they did last month, and maybe the conditions would be set, or maybe further on U.S. or Israeli attacks could set the conditions further for the Iranian people to overtake the country, the regime, and push them out of power. But again, the end game looks a little fuzzy right now. We've just got to see how this plays out, Kristen.
To that point, Mr. Secretary, the president, the administration have indicated they believe it is in fact possible to bring about regime change without U.S. boots on the ground. Based on your understanding of these military operations, is that realistic? I understand the president's calling on the Iranian people to rise up, but it is incredibly complicated to bring about regime change, is it not?
It is. It's possible. It will depend on the Iranian people at this point in time, and I hope that we're providing covert means to support them. I mean, of course, we know we provided last month Starlink terminals to the Iranian people to communicate with one another. Maybe we're providing them other means and assets, but it's going to be up to them at this point in time. But look, I'd say beyond that, after Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we had the Iranians on their knees. Their air defenses were taken down, their ballistic missile forces were spent. We had set back a considerable amount of time their nuclear enrichment process, their industry. In my view, that was the time to demand that Iran allow IAEA inspectors, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, back into the country to get back into those installations, to find where that 900 pounds of enriched uranium was, to put cameras back in place. And that didn't happen. And so there's uncertainty now. And I think the president is right. And every president before him, as long as I can remember, has said Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. So whether or not there is regime change at this point in time, I think it was important to continue to set back their missile defenses, their air defenses, their missile capabilities, and to continue to set back also their nuclear ambitions. And we may have to keep doing that if we don't see regime change.
Can you put this moment into broader context and why the president may have decided to strike now? How weak is the Iranian regime in the wake of the strikes that you just cited last summer?
Yeah, they're the weakest they've been in 47 years, right? Since the 79 takeover, and of course the American hostages, the weakest in that amount of time. And it's not just their air defenses have been decimated and their ballistic missiles spent. But in the broader regional picture, keep in mind that they've lost Hamas in Israel. They've been decimated by Israeli operations in Gaza. They lost Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They've been taken down pretty seriously by Israel. Syria has fallen. Now, of course, the regime under Bashar Assad. We know that the Iraqi Shia militia groups have been set back as well. And really the only force standing are the Houthis in Yemen, and they're not a considerable force. But nonetheless, the point is, the proxies that help prop up and defend this Islamic regime have been really taken down considerably. So it talks about weakness across the board, not just domestically, but with regard to the region and the proxies. So this is a unique moment in time in the 47-year history of this regime.
Let me ask you, because we did hear from President Trump, who delivered a video message earlier today. We've been playing that throughout the morning. Do you think, though, that he needs to come before the American people and really lay out his case in earnest?
Yeah, I think every president benefits by going before the American people and explaining what we're doing, why we're doing it, how long it will take, what the pros are, the cons, the risks. I mean, the president was right to mention that this is not a risk-free operation. We could lose Americans. So I think the more he could speak to that, to the American people directly, and I think we're being told he will today, but also to Congress, both the House and Senate, and then, of course, have his members of his cabinet go out and do the same. You know, when we took down Soleimani in January 2020, one of my jobs was to go out and call the respective members of my the Armed Services Committees and explained to them what we were doing. And then later we went before the Congress in a closed-door session in both the House and Senate and explained the operations and what we were doing. So I think that's all part and parcel of what we do, what we should do. It seems like they plan on doing that as well, and I think those are all the right moves.
Secretary Esper, you read my mind. I was going to ask you about the operation taking out Qasem Soleimani, the decision to do that, the implications. Did it in some ways lay the groundwork for this moment?
I think it laid the groundwork in the sense that it showed that the Iranians are invincible, that we can do significant damage to them without suffering repercussions that maybe some expected. Soleimani was a singular figure within the regime, probably one of the 2 or 3 most important people in Iran, and his ability to maneuver and to enable proxy forces is remarkable. So taking him down was a considerable feat. And the fact that even though Iran responded, we didn't suffer any deaths was remarkable. And I think, of course, the operations by Israel and later the United States last June also showed that the regime was much weaker, much more brittle than what we expected. And then I might add again, what happened in January, just a few weeks ago, with the Iranian people rising up in every single province and chanting, death to the Ayatollah, shows you that this regime seems very brittle and almost on the verge of collapse. And the question will be, what will it take for that to happen? And you asked the question earlier, spot on. We can't necessarily do it. We might be able to set the conditions for that to happen, but it's really going to take the Iranian people to rise up and to take charge of their own country.
Secretary Esper, do you think this moment is on the verge of a wider regional conflict, a protracted war? Vice President J.D. Vance said, no, that's not going to happen, but do you see that as a real possibility?
I don't think so in the sense of the Arab countries joining in. Of course, they thought that if they would not support U.S. operations or allow use of their oversight airspace, that Iran wouldn't touch them. And here we wake up this morning, we find out that Iran has struck nearly every Arab country in the region, whether or not they did that. So I think part of the Iranian ploy here is to try and get the Arab states involved, to kind of draw them in, maybe force them to put pressure on Washington, because it's clear that Iran doesn't have the sway with Trump that they thought he might, and the Europeans aren't getting involved. So maybe there's a diplomatic play through the Arabs, but I don't see them getting directly involved. The more precise answer to your question is, could this go on for an extended period of time? And the answer is yes, it could. Right now, I think, based on my quick read of the amount of missiles that Tehran has shot back, how they broaden out the scope of the military retaliatory responses, tells me that they think they're going to have to marshal their resources, that they see this happening for the long haul, and that they're going to hunker down, respond where they can, hunker down, respond where they can, and see how this situation plays out. Maybe the United States gets tired of the attacks. Maybe there's some type of diplomatic intervention by other countries. But I think they're going to play the long game and be more like a defensive crouch than they will trying to expand this conflict militarily.
All right, former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristen.
I now want to bring in former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Herzog. He is in Tel Aviv. Ambassador Herzog, thank you so much for joining me. We really appreciate it. I know tensions are running high right now where you are. Talk to me about your reaction to this joint military operation between the United States and Israel. How do you see it unfolding?
Hello from bomb shelter in Tel Aviv. We spent a lot of time here since the morning, on average a few times an hour. The war just started. I think we are witnessing a joint U.S.-Israel operation, which was probably prepared for weeks, if not more than that. With the declared aim of both denying the Iranian regime's strategic capabilities, especially nuclear and missile capabilities, and at the same time degrading the regime and hopefully hastening its demise. There's overwhelming support here in Israel for this operation. It just started, but I believe it finds the Iranian regime at a low point, the lowest that I can remember in recent history, perhaps since the Ayatollahs took over in 1979, and we'll see how this develops. Obviously, Iran responded with missile firing at U.S. bases in the region and Israel. The volume of their barrages has not been very good, and I understand that as we speak, Israeli planes are hunting Iranian missile launchers, and I expect that with time they will be depleted.
Ambassador Herzog, were you surprised by how quickly Iran retaliated? Because in the wake of the last pinprick strike, if you want to call it that, by the United States, several hours elapsed before there was a response. In this instance, it seemed almost immediate. Was the United States prepared for that?
Yes, I think the Iranians were expecting this for a while. It was in the air that if negotiations failed, then the U.S. might strike. So if you're an Iranian, you sit in Tehran, you prepare your immediate response. I believe that a big focus for the U.S. and Israel in the opening strike was to go after Iranian retaliation capabilities, so as to lower their ability to retaliate and probably end the war quicker. But nobody is surprised that they fired back. But again, I expect that to go down with time as they are under pressure from overwhelming force of the U.S. and Israel.
You raise the diplomatic process. Is there any hope that diplomatic talks can get back on track? Mr. Ambassador, there were supposed to be talks this coming week.
So I don't expect that to happen while the guns are talking. The war is raging right now. Maybe in a while, when Iran is under pressure, will be willing to go back to the negotiating table with better terms, but I think that might take a while.
And President Trump has talked about regime change. He called on the Iranian people to stand up, to seize this moment. He said, you might not have another moment like this. Ambassador, is it realistic to think that this can